Thank you very much for the nice introduction, and thanks to everybody for being here. I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to be here tonight and to talk to you a bit about rhythm and music in the brain. I'm going to start tonight, let's see if I can get this thing working, by talking to you a bit about the idea that humans move to music. So a central theme of this talk is going to be the observation that music moves us. And this is something that for humans is very automatic. It's something that emerges from a very young age. We do this even as babies when we hear music. And so I'll tell you a bit about how humans do this, but then I'll spend a bit of time talking about whether or not non-human animals are able to do the same thing. And I'll tell you a bit about the distinctions between the way that we move to music and the way that animals are capable of moving to music. Then I'll switch topics a little bit and I'll talk a bit about how our brains respond to rhythm. So one idea is that the automaticity of our movement to music might arise from activation of the motor areas of our brain in response to music. So I'll show you some data related to that using brain imaging techniques. This leads into asking questions about whether rhythm can act as a therapy for conditions that are characterized by movement-related problems. So conditions like Parkinson's disease, for example, where there are impairments in movement like freezing and trouble initiating movements, for example. And I'll end slightly more speculatively by asking how this relationship between movement and music got here in the first place. So how did this relationship evolve? I'd like to start by showing you an adorable video. So these are two twins playing together, and I just want you to pay attention to what happens when the music starts. So I'm showing you this video to emphasize that this is something we do totally automatically, and we do it from the time that we're babies. Nobody had to teach these little guys that when music comes on, you should start moving. They just know that this is something you do, and they're not perfectly synchronized, but they just start moving automatically when music comes on. And this is something that we all seem to internalize to some extent. So I'd like to talk for just a minute about what it is about music that we're actually moving to. It's not the melody, and it's not the harmony, and it's not the orchestration. These are very pitch-based features of music, and that's not what we tend to move to. Instead, we're moving to the rhythm. And in fact, we're moving to a particular feature of rhythm that I'll refer to as the beat. So I'll give you a really simple demonstration, because this distinction between rhythm and beat for some people is quite intuitive, and for other people this is a bit of a foreign concept. So if I sing you, hopefully this isn't totally embarrassing, but if I sing you the opening lines to the William Tell Overture that you're going to recognize, hopefully, if I can perform this accurately, which goes da-da-da, 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 da-da. The rhythm is da-da-da, 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 da-da. So the rhythm's just a pattern of time intervals that characterizes the music. But if I ask you to move along with that, to clap along with me, or to stomp your feet along with me, or to nod your head along with me, you're not going to do what I just clapped. You're going to do something like da-da-da, 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 da-da. And so it's that regular pulse that you would move to that I'm talking about when I say the beat. So I'd like for us to do a couple of examples together. So I'm going to play you some music clips, and a metronome, a high beeping sound, is going to start beeping along with the music. And I want you to say whether you feel like it's on the beat or off the beat. And this is a test that we actually give participants in our lab. So this is one way that we assess beat perception abilities in humans. And this is something that's quite variable across the population, actually. So don't feel bad if it's difficult, because it's difficult on purpose, because this is a test we use to try to make this, difficult for people. And the first one in particular I find is a little bit difficult, but they get easier as we go. So are you ready? So is that beeping on the beat? Off the beat?
Yes.
Off the beat. Great. You guys are really good at this. Okay, so another one. On the beat? On the beat. That one I find slightly more satisfying to listen to. Somehow I think it's because the beeping is on the beat and it's not disturbing. Okay, last one. That one's pretty bad, right? That one's off the beat, yeah. So as I said, this is a test that we actually use in our lab to assess beat perception abilities in humans. And this is really easy to do with humans because I can ask you whether you think the beeping is on the beat or off the beat, and you could give me an answer. With animals, this is a little bit more difficult because we can't ask them any questions, and they can't indicate for us whether they think something is on or off the beat. So we have to use different methods to ask whether animals are able to do the same things that humans are able to do quite easily. So I'd like to just show you a video. This is a YouTube video that was a bit of a sensation actually in the sort of rhythm perception world for a little while, and started a whole line of research on whether birds are able to synchronize with the beat in music. So let me just play this for you and you'll see what I mean. So this is Snowball, and as I said, Snowball was sort of first a YouTube sensation, and then a group of neuroscientists decided that they would study Snowball's movements in response to music to test whether or not this bird was capable of synchronizing with the beat in music the same way that humans are able to do so. What I can tell you, and what you might have been able to see, is that there were times when Snowball was very synchronized with the beat, and then there were other times that Snowball didn't look so good, actually. And so what Snowball's doing is sort of drifting in and out of being synchronized. And this is something that humans don't tend to do. So it seemed as if Snowball was capable of producing a sort of fixed tempo, and if the music would sort of move around, he wasn't capable of sort of holding on to it. And I'll return to this in just a few minutes. But I'd like to first talk just a bit more generally about some of the differences between the way that humans synchronize to music and the way that animals synchronize to each other most of the time. So in general, non-human animal synchronization is what we would refer to as simple. So let me give you an example. So crickets do synchronize with each other, but they're producing the same sound over and over again, and it's always at the same rate. So this is why we characterize this type of synchronization as simple. What humans are capable of doing, on the other hand, is quite complex. So I'm going to play you an example of something complex that's actually quite easy to hear the beat in. So this is one important difference between human and animal synchronization. Another difference is that animals tend to synchronize within a relatively narrow range. So what I mean by that is that they tend to be able to synchronize at a particular rate, but not go slower or faster than that. So what Snowball was doing was synchronizing to one Backstreet Boys song, but if you were to speed up or slow down his music, he's not synchronized anymore. So he has a very narrow range of rates, or a narrow range of tempi at which he's capable of synchronizing. Humans, on the other hand, are capable of synchronization with a beat in music across a very wide range of rates, a wide range of tempi. So you can intuit about this a little bit by thinking about your ability to hear the beat in a slow ballad or in a fast techno song. And those are sort of equally easy for us. There are, of course, limits if things slow down so that there's one beat every minute or something. We're not tracking it anymore. But our range is much, much wider than most animals that have been studied so far. Finally, non-human animal synchronization seems to be limited to within modality synchronization. So what I mean by that is that they tend to synchronize like with like. So the crickets synchronize sound with sound, and fireflies, I hope you can see this with the lights the way they are, synchronize light with light. So this is a group of fireflies, and I hope that you can see at the beginning they were kind of flashing independently from each other. And over time, they're becoming synchronized. So more and more of them are flashing in synchrony, and they become brighter and brighter during the times that they are synchronized. And I find this really impressive, but this is a within modality synchronization. What humans are doing is synchronizing across modalities. So what I mean is that we're synchronizing the movements of our body with something that we're listening to, with music, with rhythm. So this is an auditory stimulus and a body movement in response. So this is a cross-modality synchronization. There's a hypothesis that's important to say just a quick sentence or two about before I move on to the next bit, that the types of animals that might be capable of synchronizing with a beat in music are those that use vocal mimicry. So you're all capable of vocal mimicry. If I say something for you, you can all repeat it back to me, and that's fine. And some songbirds operate like this. So songbird parents teach their children particular songs. They're capable of mimicking vocalizations and using those for communication. But a lot of animals aren't capable of doing this, and so a number of scientists have the hypothesis that in order for a species to be able to synchronize with the beat in music, they should be vocal mimics. But I'm going to show you an example now of a species that provides evidence that this might not be true. So Ronan is a sea lion, and I'm going to show you just a short sort of piece of a documentary that shows Ronan doing a lot of very interesting synchronization with music, and there's going to be a scientist telling you a bit about his skills.
So we train Ronan to move her head in time to rhythmic sounds, and outside of humans, this ability has been seen previously only in parrots and some related birds. Ronan is actually the first non-human mammal to be shown to be able to keep a beat. A simple repeating sound, something like a metronome. But what she had learned, without further training, Ronan was able to find and keep the beat in complex stimuli, including music. People thought that vocal mimicry might actually be a necessary precondition for rhythmic ability. But our findings with Ronan, who as a sea lion is not a vocal mimic, challenge that theory. It may be that rhythmic ability is much more widespread in the animal kingdom than previously thought.
Well, the animals seem to like the Backstreet Boys for some reason, and I kind of don't get that, but whatever. Another species that's, or set of species, I should say, that's interesting to scientists that are concerned with evolutionary questions, where did our ability to synchronize with music come from, are monkeys. And the idea is that if we want to know where this ability came from, we should look to see whether our closest evolutionary relatives are able to do the same things as us. I'm going to show you a couple of clips of a monkey synchronizing with a metronome, but I need some human data first, so I'm going to ask you to participate along with me. So the task is that I'm going to play a metronome for you, and I'd like for you to clap along as soon as you get the beat. And it's just a regular metronome, there aren't any tricks. And then once the beeping goes away, I want you to keep clapping for, say, 4 or 5 claps, and then stop. And if it gets out of hand, I'll give you some, I'll wave you down. Okay, so ready? Excellent. You guys are super at this. So that went very well, and it was very easy, and it seemed very automatic for all of you. I'm going to talk a bit about what you did that was special, but I'd like to show you how monkeys do this first, and then it's going to become more clear why what you did was so interesting. So I'm going to show you a clip of a monkey doing this. The first one doesn't have any sound. I'm just going to explain what you're looking at. This is a little monkey hand, and he's listening to beeping exactly like what you just heard. And in time with the beeping, he's pushing a little lever. So he has to move the lever forward in time with the beeping. And it's important to know that this monkey has been trained for months and months to be able to do this task. Here's one with sound, so you'll get to see and hear now why what you did is so different from what the monkey did, and I think you'll realize as soon as you see how he's performing this task what the difference is. So he's reacting to sounds, right? He's hearing a beep, pushing the lever. Hearing a beep, pushing the lever. And he's doing this in response every time. What you did was that you clapped along with every tone. So what you actually had to do to be able to accomplish that was to predict the future. And you had to start moving before you heard anything. So this ability to predict what's coming next based on the beat is what humans are able to do that it doesn't seem that animals are able to do. This is what makes human synchronization with musical rhythm exceptional. I talked so far about the idea that we move very easily and very automatically to the beat in musical rhythm. And the question that we're really interested in the lab that I'm a part of at Western is why this is the case. And so one idea is that maybe when we listen to music, when we listen to rhythms, the motor parts of our brain are actually being activated. And so we almost can't help but to move because the motor parts of our brain are doing stuff automatically. So I'm going to show you a little bit of brain imaging data to support this idea. The task in this situation is that the participants are listening to a rhythm. So this is just 2 presentations of the same rhythm. You get to hear it twice for practice. It's just to help out. And then you get a different rhythm. And you have to say, well, it's not always a different rhythm. It's the sort of target rhythm. And you have to say whether that last rhythm was the same as these 2 or different from the first 2. And I'll play you an example of that so it makes a little bit more sense. But what we're doing here is we're putting participants into a brain scanner. So this is a functional magnetic resonance imaging machine. Some of you may have had an fMRI before, or an MRI. This is something that happens for like other body parts that aren't the brain, knees, for example. And we can see which parts of the brain are responding to the task that we're asking people to do. So let me just play you an example of what one trial would sound like, and I'll ask you what you think at the end. So was that same or different? Different. Very good. So we're looking at the brain activation in response to the first two presentations of that rhythm. So nobody's moving because they haven't decided what they're going to say yet. You're not comparing things mentally yet because you haven't heard that last rhythm. So you're just listening to two repetitions of any old rhythm like the one you heard. And I'm going to show you now what the brain's doing while you're doing that. The first thing that we see is a sort of intuitive thing. These parts of the brain, so the nose, you can see sort of the eyes and the nose would be here. So this is the front of the head. And there's activation on either side here. This is the auditory cortex. And the auditory cortex, which sits basically just behind the ears, is the part of the brain that's responsible for processing sounds. So you're listening to rhythms, the part of your brain that's processing sounds is responding. That's not surprising. The more interesting thing is that we saw a whole lot of motor parts of the brain responding. So the supplementary motor area, that sits just here at the top. The premotor cortex on both sides, that sits just down the sides from the supplementary motor area on the sides here. The basal ganglia, that's really just in the middle. And the cerebellum, which you can't see on this picture, but which sits right on the back of the head down at the bottom. And these are all brain areas that are responsible for your ability to move your body. And these are being activated in response to listening to rhythms without moving. So the motor system responds to rhythms, and this is true for individuals who are highly musical trained and for individuals who have never had a single hour of musical training in their entire lives. So it doesn't matter your musical skill, it's still the motor areas of your brain that are responding to rhythms. I started at the beginning talking about music, and the rhythms I just played for you are actually quite a bit removed from music. They're a little bit boring even. So the next bit of data I'm going to show you compares what the brain is doing during listening to musical rhythms and listening to music. So that way we can know whether we're looking at the same type of activation or whether these sort of simple rhythms that we use for doing science are just too boring, just too simple. They're not doing the same things as real music. So this is a picture that should look a little bit familiar. This is a slice right down the sort of middle, this direction. And you can see here the supplementary motor area, the premotor cortex, the basal ganglia. So, oops. That's the stimulus that, or an example of a stimulus that these motor areas are responding to. That's what I wanted to do, was to highlight that these are all motor regions. Here I'm showing you brain activation in response to real music. And you can see the areas that are being activated by real music are exactly the same as what we're looking at when we present these relatively boring rhythms. And the real music was quite rich and sounded like this. So we've got some confidence now that this activation of motor areas of the brain in response to music is also something that we can study using these relatively simple rhythms that we can control really tightly to do experiments with. So the question then that comes out of this, that we're also quite interested in the lab that I'm a part of, is whether rhythm and music can be used to help those with damage to the brain. So this could be as a result of an injury, or it could be as a result of a disorder. And in particular, we're interested in the idea that rhythm and music can be used for therapeutic applications for specifically brain disorders, neurological disorders that impair movements. And we study a lot of Parkinson's patients in our lab. And Parkinson's patients show particular movement impairments like difficulty initiating movements, freezing episodes, and unsteady gait. So what I mean by unsteady gait is a sort of shuffling type of walking or spending more time on one foot than on the other, unstableness in terms of walking, and this can lead to falls, for example. So we're interested in understanding how to remedy this. So I'd like to show you a video, and this is just anecdotal. So this is of a Parkinson's patient, and he's going to walk around on screen for a little while. You're going to see he's got quite a bit of trouble with a lot of motor things. And then he's going to put on some music for himself, and I'll let you watch what happens. So you can see he's spending a lot more time on one foot than he is on the other. He's having trouble initiating movements. And he's just going to pop off screen, put on a bit of music, and come back. You can already see he's more fluid. He's going to perform a couple dance moves. So this is really just an unbelievable transformation that happens instantly between silence and music being on in the background. This is anecdotal, though, so this is for one person working, but we're interested in whether we can uncover scientific evidence for music aiding movement. And what we're studying is something called rhythmic auditory stimulation. So you can accomplish this in different ways. You can use metronomes, so simple stimuli like what you were clapping along with just a couple of minutes ago. This is something that's often studied as a sort of just like auditory cueing. It gives you a sort of pacing signal. Or you can use real music. What you study then is how the walking changes, how the gait changes. So I'm going to show you a video next to sort of demonstrate what type of setup you might be using to do this. So this is a patient who's walking down a corridor, and his job is to go to the end of the corridor, push a button on the wall, turn around, and come back. And he's wearing a sort of portable device that measures how he's moving, and he's got an experimenter following him around holding some of the cables. So in this first clip, he's not listening to anything. He's just walking by himself. So you can see he's shuffling a bit. He's got little tiny steps. He's just pushed the button, and then he freezes on the way back. You can see the experimenter getting a bit bored. And now he's moving again. In the next clip, he's wearing portable headphones and he's listening to a metronome. And you're unfortunately not going to be able to hear it because it is being delivered via headphones, so there wasn't any external sound during the filming, but it's a lot like what you were clapping to just a couple of minutes ago. So you can see that he's taking bigger steps, he's moving faster, more fluidly, he pushes the button, turns around, comes back. So for some people, it seems that rhythmic auditory stimulation can be very, very effective, and this is extremely promising. But it's really important to understand that this works for some individuals, but not everyone. And in fact, it can be harmful for some people. So for some people, if you ask them to listen to music and walk at the same time, it seems like multitasking. So some of us can't chew gum and walk at the same time. It's the same with listening to music. It seems like doing two things at once is not helpful. In terms of the science, the experiments that have been done so far on rhythmic auditory stimulation have suffered from running very small groups of participants, so it's very difficult to generalize to how this might work with the bigger population. And there's a lot of variation in the way the stimulation is given. So I've mentioned metronomes and music, but the music varies widely. So some studies use music from the radio. Some use the same children's song over and over and over for 3 weeks, which I would find really annoying. Sometimes the experimenter is a bit of a composer, him or herself, and writes the music, and we have no idea how effective this might be. So there's a lot of different ways that one can approach this in terms of the music that one's presenting. One important idea is that these studies have never assessed the musical abilities of the patients. So patients and controls or non-patients vary in how much musical training we have, how much musical ability we have, and this might affect the way that we respond to music, especially if the music is variable. And these studies rarely assess musical preferences. So if you're listening to the same children's song that you hate for 3 weeks, is this going to help you versus listening to something that you, or a genre at least, that you absolutely love? You know, this might be something that's more helpful. So in our lab, we're really interested in assessing what the important musical features are that might make rhythmic auditory stimulation a more viable therapy. This is a picture of the setup in our lab at Western. So we've got a long hallway, and this is a specialized mat that runs down the hall. This mat has sensors in it that measure the footsteps. So you can see maybe, hopefully, that on the computer here, she's measuring his footsteps actually. So we know how long each of the steps is, how wide the steps are, the timing of those steps, so we know how fast the person is moving. If they're spending more time on one foot than they are on the other, we know all of this information from this device here. And we're conducting experiments where we vary how much a person likes certain music, how many times a person has heard a piece of music. So is this something you know every word to, or is this the first time you're hearing it in your entire life? These things might make a difference, and we're really interested in studying this in our lab. So I hope that myself or somebody else from my lab can report back to you in a couple of years and say how this is going. But this is really in progress work. These are really open questions with respect to how well rhythmic auditory stimulation can be made to work for different people by tailoring the stimulation to the individual. So in the last part of the talk, I'd like to sort of switch gears and talk about something a little bit more speculative and a little bit fun, which is why would music be associated with movement in the first place? So a lot of these ideas are evolutionary. How did this relationship get started in the first place? Where did this come from? Why did it persist? And I have to mention that a lot of these ideas are really hard to test experimentally, but they're very fun to think about. So the first idea that's important to understand is that currently we don't have to move very much to produce music. We have portable devices that we carry around with us, and we maybe have to move our finger, but we can sit on the bus on the way to work totally stationary and still have music delivered to us. So we don't have to move around a lot. But historically, there was no music without movement. And in fact, there was no music without groups of people moving together. This was very much a group activity to make music. So this is the first sort of fundamental association between music and movement, and in fact, lots of people moving together in synchrony with music. One idea about why this might have persisted is that moving together in synchrony might be rewarding. So we have parts of our brain that are referred to as reward centers. And these reward centers respond to things like money and sex and drugs. So this is a little image of a cocaine response in the reward centers of the brain. So the question is whether moving together in synchrony along with music might give us the same sort of rewarding effects that some of these things might give us. So to answer the question whether that's viable, whether that's true as a hypothesis, we can look in the brain. So I'm going to describe a study for you that was conducted in Germany. And this is a brain imaging study. So it used the same technology that I talked about before, functional magnetic resonance imaging. And it looked into the reward centers of the brain, the same parts that respond when we're thinking about gambling, if we like gambling, and when we're thinking about money, if we like money. So a person's just laying down in here, and their job is to tap their finger. And you can't move around very much in those machines. They're pretty tight, so you can only move your finger. And the trick is that they had to tap along with another person, with a partner. And they could hear how well their partner was doing through headphones that they were wearing in the scanner. So the manipulation here is that either the partner was a really good tapper and they were a really good coordinator, and so the participant and the partner were really in sync with each other, and this potentially is a very satisfying experience to be nicely in sync with someone else. In the other condition, the partner was really bad at this. They were a terrible tapper. They weren't able to stay in sync. They were all over the place. And so this was likely a very frustrating experience for the person in the scanner who's trying really hard to stay in synchrony with their partner, and their partner's just not allowing this to happen. This is, of course, a trick. It's not a real partner. It's an experimenter. And so that's important later. So what they found was that the reward centers of the brain, so the same parts of your brain that respond to chocolate and respond to cocaine, for example, these responded more when the partner was good. So when they were having a nice, synchronized, coordinated experience with another person, the reward centers of the brain were responding. And they weren't responding when the other tapper was terrible and they were having a frustrating experience where they weren't able to synchronize with another human. What happened next is really interesting. So after the person comes out of the scanner, they go into the next room and they're supposed to fill out some surveys or something, and then the partner happens to be in that room, the good or bad tapping partner. And like I said, the partner is just an experimenter, and they must have been quite a good actor because they were carrying some pencils and then they tripped and they fell down and they dropped all the pencils all over the floor. And the experimenters tested how many pencils were picked up by the person who had formerly been laying in the scanner. And it turns out that if you had a good tapping experience with that partner, you picked up more pencils off the floor. So you were more helpful and more altruistic if you had just had a nice coordinated experience with another person, and you were less likely to help and more likely to leave them to their own to pick up the pencils if they were a really uncoordinated tapper that you couldn't synchronize with. So it's possible that this rewarding experience of synchronizing with another human carries over and has social effects. So maybe it bonds us to other people and encourages us to help them or to act in an altruistic manner towards them. And this could be one reason that the interest in this ability, or that this ability to synchronize with each other and with music, has persisted throughout history. So I'm going to show you a video now of an enormous group of people synchronizing on a massive scale with each other. And then I'm going to talk a bit about why this is important.
All we hear is Radio Gaga, Radio Boo, Radio Gaga. All we hear is Radio Gaga, Radio Boo, Radio Gaga. All we hear is Radio Gaga.
So this is Live Aid, I think, and you can see that this is just an absolutely enormous group of people all moving in perfect synchrony with each other. And if you've ever been to an event of this size and moved in synchrony with a group this size, you know that this can be a really profound experience, and you can have amazing social bonds to the other people that are in the group, even if you never see them. What's important here about this particular group is that music was the sort of glue that kept them all together. You can't synchronize a group of this size without a cue, without a mechanism. And in this case, music acted as that mechanism. So it's possible that music as a sort of mechanism to promote synchronization might be an important reason that we've developed the ability to make these nice sounds that we now enjoy on our iPods. So in terms of clues related to why music might have evolved, moving together seems to support social bonding. It leads to increased altruism and resource sharing, so we're more likely to help somebody that we've just had a nice synchronization experience with, and music seems to provide a mechanism for synchronization of large groups of people. And this is also important for social bonding in bigger groups. Another sort of seemingly unrelated reason that music and synchronization might have stuck around as things that we're able to do is related to the intimidation of predators or enemies. So there's a tribe of pygmies whose name I dare not pronounce, who live in a place where gorillas live. And the gorillas sometimes come too close to the village. And this is very scary because gorillas are big and strong. And if they're hungry, they can be quite mean. So what the villagers do is that the women of the tribe stay up all night and they sing together in unison so that they can produce a sound which is much bigger than the sounds that could be produced by one person. And this scares the gorillas away because they think this must be a really big animal, whatever, that's living in this tribe. I'm going to show you another video of another way that synchronization can be used for intimidation by making a sort of group seem bigger and scarier than any one person or an uncoordinated group of people could be. So sorry, I know there was a little bit of bad language at the end, but I think this guy just perfectly sums up what's going on. This is really, really scary to have all these guys marching towards you in perfect synchrony with each other. And it's a lot scarier than if they were either alone or in a disorganized group, sort of running around trying to contain the protesters. So synchrony can be quite useful for intimidation. This is the sort of the negative side, the scary side of our ability to synchronize with each other. The last thing I'll mention is that our ability to synchronize with each other is capitalized on by militaries today. So this can be a good thing because synchrony promotes social bonding. So in training exercises, the guys that synchronize with each other become bonded with each other. And that can be quite important for staying alive in stressful situations. You want to take care of each other. That's really, really important. The negative side, and this is sort of less common today in the way that wars are being fought, but was more important historically when wars were fought with lines of soldiers marching towards the enemies. This was an intimidation practice. So this is something that's been capitalized on in military trainings and the way that we teach militaries to fight. So I'd like to wrap up with a little bit of a summary. I've told you that humans are special and that we spontaneously move to the beat. I asked you to clap along with a metronome, and you did this within 3 beeps. But I also told you that animals, you saw Ronan the sea lion, and I showed you some clips of a monkey who had been trained for months and months and months just to be able to react to a sound in time. So the human ability to predict the future and to start moving before the next thing comes because we're synchronized with the beat is something that seems to be quite special. I've also shown you that rhythm causes activity in motor brain areas, and we think this might be related to our sometimes uncontrollable urges to move when we listen to music. It's because the motor parts of our brain are actually activated by listening to music and listening to rhythms. It's possible, for exactly that reason, that music might be useful as a therapy to alleviate movement impairments that are associated with particular disorders like Parkinson's disease, for example. So if we can use an auditory stimulus to bring these motor brain areas online, maybe we can help to get a person moving who's having trouble initiating movement or who's freezing, for example. And finally, I've told you that moving together is rewarding. It encourages social bonding, it encourages altruistic behaviors towards each other and sharing of resources, for example, but it also has downsides. It can be upsides if we're trying to scare away gorillas, but it can be downsides if we're trying to scare other people. And so synchrony has sort of positive and negatives in terms of intimidation of other people, but we'll end on the social bonding aspect because that's a nice one. And these reasons are potentially, we'd like to think, why music and our ability to synchronize with music and with each other might have persisted over history. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. It's been a pleasure speaking to you today.